Hi.
Hello.
We're here for our first official episode. I'm Jackie and I'm joined by my colleague Caitlin and also my other colleague Danni Gheorghe today.
Hello.
Hi, Danni. Welcome
Hi.
to PIP.
I'm very excited.
What are we chatting about today?
We're talking about social today, so social participation goals, which is very exciting. And that's the reason we asked Danni to join us because Danni and I were lucky enough to present at the OT Exchange last year, and we spoke on the social interpreter. And it was really well received, and we really loved how many, questions we got asked about it and how much interest there was. So we thought, why not kick off our first episode talking about that?
I feel like it's diving in the deep end too. Like
It
I feel
is,
like
yeah.
that's like we're really committing.
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah. Addressing
Love it.
social participation goals can be really quite tricky for so many different clinicians.
Absolutely.
And I think it is because we as clinicians are really trying to do that in a neuroaffirming way.
Yeah, I think social's been one of those things that has really had the biggest lots of change over the last little bit. So we hope we do it justice. We should have done handwriting.
I know. Well, I really like it wouldn't be
I was
as
like, okay,
appropriate
guys,
for
I'll
all
give it a
clinicians,
shot.
though. Absolutely.
Look,
But
we do have a lot of faith in the way that we tackle social goals. So hopefully, that comes across in terms of the reason why we've chosen it for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those of our listeners, I suppose, we hope there's listeners that don't know anything about the social interpreter or what we spoke about at OTX. Dan, do you want to fill them in?
Yeah. So I guess social interpreter, we should really give credit where credit's due because that term specifically came from Shadia Hancock from Autism Actually, who is a fabulous autistic advocate that we work quite closely with on a lot of different projects. And they came to speak to us quite a few years ago now and it sort of referred to therapists through their journey as being social interpreters, and we really kind of attached to that concept and that, I guess, that title and that label because that's how we really saw ourselves. And so the idea of being a social interpreter really, and I guess the process through which and the lens through which we look at being a social interpreter is that through the double empathy theory, which is really, and the double empathy problem, which is really the idea that we have two different types of brains that are communicating with one another, so the neurodivergent brain and the neurotypical brain, and there is no right way for either of those brains to communicate, and there often ends up being communication mismatches between those two brains when they are attempting to communicate. And so historically, the focus has really in social skill development, social participation goals has been on social skills, and it's been on this idea that neurodivergent individuals have to modify the way that they communicate in order to align more so with how a neurotypical person communicates.
Yeah.
And the double empathy problem really calls that out.
Yeah.
And speaks to the fact that actually it's a mismatch between communication styles in general, and it's a two-way street. It's no one's responsibility, no one neurotype's responsibility to modify their communication type. And so where the social interpreter comes into that, and this is where I struggle like in a recording setting versus my like presenting settings because I don't have my little visuals and my images.
We can put them in the speaker notes.
Exactly right.
In the speaker notes.
But like when we've got the image, we've got our neurotypical brain on one side, we've got our neurodivergent brain on the other side, we have our double-sided arrow that goes between the two, and our social interpreter is really that person that stands in the middle.
Yeah.
And it really acts as that interpreter between the two different neurotypes. And so it's really to bridge that gap and to interpret those mismatches so that they make sense for both sides.
Yeah. I think the reason that I really liked it as an OT is because that possibilities endless. It's
Absolutely.
like, you know, that role in the middle is so complex because I think traditionally we see often in the therapy role, our role is working with the individual who is our client or with the client's family. But the interpreter role is so much more complex than that.
Yes.
It really looks
Absolutely.
at how we advocate with the other communication partner, but also how we can work with people to create environments where that can happen well.
Yeah.
And then also, I guess the space we love is really training up those people that are supports in those individuals' lives to also be interpreters.
That's it.
So I think that's why we really clung to it a little bit and really loved it because it really fits OT so nicely.
Well, that's it. The intervention doesn't just happen with the client. It's not just this one-on-one, let's talk about your development and how you can change or modify or shift. It's really actually let's look at your environment. Let's look at the people that you communicate with. How do they communicate? What goes well? What doesn't? How would you like it? How would you like it to change if you would like it to change?
Yeah.
And how can we work with both you and the people around you to actually make this feel more comfortable for you?
And I think that comes down to the, I guess, the social participation goals in the first place.
Yes.
And how we even nut out those goals, because I think that's where we kind of start often.
Yeah, and I have a really great memory of you both presenting a visual tool that we use clinically here a lot to establish important goals to the individual from a social lens.
It's funny because we've just gone through our whole goal setting. We've just begun the start of the new year and our whole goal setting process with our families and our clients, and that has been something I've used so much over the last few weeks.
And it's a tool that we can, again, pop in the speaker notes, a link to it.
Already giving away freebies.
Yeah, perhaps we can give it away for free. I don't know.
If you were at OTX, you already would have got access to it. So I feel like we're depriving other listeners if we don't.
And it is a tool that we really believe has allowed us to give our clients an opportunity to voice goals that are important to them. And I think that doing that has been really helpful. I know for myself, I did it with one particular individual, a grade 6 client, and she spoke a lot about, because we presented it in a way that I allowed her to give space to what was easy and difficult for her on a visual scale, essentially, but also then what was important to her. And I think that's something that comes up a lot in my work with the clients that I work with, are that there's social expectations from neurotypical peers, such as maintaining eye contact in conversations, which is something that this particular client had said, that's really difficult for me.
And was it important?
No. So that was the flip side, that she spoke a lot about, that she's had teachers that have put that on her as that she's not listening or she's not engaged in the learning or whatever it might be. And she spoke a lot about that. It was down the other end of it's not important to her. And she has other strategies for communicating that she is attending to that person.
And do you know what I love about this tool in particular is that the social interpreter role starts right from, like, the social interpreter role with the neurotypical communication partner or the community around the neurotypical communication partner starts right from the get-go in terms of the info gather, because straight away you have this information that is like, this is not important. So straight away we know that part of our interpreting role is actually to go back to the school environment and go back to the people in the school environment and be like, hey, this thing's not important. It's also not something we're going to ham on. It's not something we're going to
still have social success without that.
I think that's something that like our biggest learning curve has been around that. It's something that in the social skills world that's been typically really overlooked, I think, because it was such a quick move to let's help, and all intentions have always been positive.
Absolutely.
But I guess it's that, like, when you know better, you do better, isn't it?
Favorite quote is Maya Angelou, which is forgive yourself for what you didn't know before you learnt it.
So we've really been on a huge journey to just understand how we can figure out what people's genuine social communication preferences are and their social participation goals, and moving away from this term of social skills, which is has such rigid connotations. And yes, we can all learn different skills, but we try not to necessarily say that we're targeting social skills because we've moved so far away from that, really, I think. And Shadia really helped us to flesh out when we were developing the tool, this idea of social participation goals. And that's what we really like, because sometimes it's not even about skills, but it still allows that space to still deeply explore perspective taking, which is still the core of how we want humans to kind of interact, and how we need to be able to deeply understand the people we're sharing space with.
Well, it creates informed choice.
That's right.
Doesn't it, Jack? Because it creates this opportunity for a person to actually have an informed role in the communication and the interaction that they're having. Otherwise, if another person it goes in blindly and doesn't have the option to take perspective, or doesn't even know that it's something that is done in an interaction, it's actually not setting them up to even opt in.
No, that's right.
It's not giving them the opportunity to say, actually, this is something that I would like to participate in, or something I wouldn't.
Yes.
It goes both ways.
Or something that I want to learn the skills to be able to do when I want to.
Yes.
Like a skill that you can turn on and off, and it is that informed choice, isn't it? And I think that that's something that, I think if we can really I guess share that insight with our listeners, for those that are really like understandably tentative to work on social skills and where to start with that, I think is really to just explore what the individual social preferences are.
I think the other thing with the perspective taking, when we touched on that, is the fact that teaching perspective taking does not mean teaching someone else to align with the perspective of someone else.
No,
that's not what perspective taking, or agree with it, or change their behavior to make another person feel comfortable. That's not what perspective taking is.
We just want that awareness there.
Exactly right. This maybe is what that person was thinking, because it actually creates understanding, and that's the interpreter. The interpreter role. When you think about literally. And every time I say interpreter, I think about someone in an airport, because I just feel like that is the kind of thing that, the kind of tangible
like a
place.
controller?
No, I mean like a language interpreter.
Oh, right. What are we visualizing here?
There was a breakdown. I don't know.
Someone in an airport.
Sorry, I didn't give enough information. I didn't give or brain bridge. Or brain bridge. But no, I think about someone that, if there was someone traveling from one country to another and they were having difficulty in articulating their perspective.
So much more sense.
You should have started there.
Okay, I was getting there. I thought it was a good connection.
But I was really trying to piece together how you were going to relate this to air traffic controls.
Would have been very inventive of me if I did that. Is this idea that there is a middleman, and there's a person who understands both people equally, somewhat equally, because of the underpinning of their education or their experience or their interactions with those people. They understand it more fully, and so therefore they have this balanced role in being able to share that information with both parties in a way that makes sense to both parties. The other thing that I think is really important to mention too, Katie, with that tool is it can be used as a visual tool. It can be used as a written tool. It can be used with speaking clients, non-speaking clients, clients who use AAC, like that. So it's so variable and so flexible, which means that people of all communication preferences, people of all cognition levels and a whole range of abilities can participate in their own social goal setting.
So once we have that information, where do we go with it then? You know, now we understand their social goals and their social preferences and what's important to them. How do we then step into the role as clinicians? You know, what's the practicalities for people listening to move it from understanding the person as our client to actually getting outcomes and addressing those goals?
It's so specific based on
the individual.
Based on the individual's chosen social participation goal.
And it might be something very specific. Or it might be broader, like perspective.
Absolutely.
What's an example from your client that just did it, Katie?
So we actually had a goal around, firstly, understanding the double empathy problem.
Yes.
I had had countless sessions with this individual where she was expressing that she felt really misunderstood by her peers or different from her peers, and that she felt like she was constantly trying to figure out and do what they expected of her. So just allowing her to understand there's a reason for that, that that's not something she's made up in her head, was really empowering for her.
Yeah.
And we did that across a few sessions and then started working on, she's more recently in our last session identified that she would like to be able to present to her peers as someone that is approachable, whatever that means to her. We still haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
But within that, I've also started bringing mum into that to build her skills up in being that social interpreter because, and that's the thing that for this client, I have really, really reinforced that it's not her sole responsibility to be figuring out and applying what she thinks her peers want, because this particular individual is very motivated to have friends and be in a friendship group. That's really important to her. So I also discussed with her looking to build on her connections of people that do have communication styles that are very similar to her as well.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's where she also finds difficulty in that her particular way of communicating. This particular individual is quite a direct communicator. And for somebody that doesn't understand that might have a different word for direct communication, such as rude.
And do you know what I love about that is that we have another tool, which we spoke about at OTX, which when you were speaking about direct versus indirect, that we use to unpack that with clients to build their self-awareness around what type of communicator are they in terms of what they value as a communicator, and what type of communicators do they communicate well with, or alternatively struggle to communicate with. So it's essentially like the wheel, the social communication preference wheel, which is this visual again that is based on there's no right or wrong, there's no ideal place to be pitched on the wheel, but there is wedges in the wheel that depicts, like, you might be more of a direct communicator or an indirect communicator, you might prefer verbal or non-verbal communication, you might rely more on body language, or you might rely more on words, or whatever it might be.
Really powerful. I know you had a particular client where just educating other people in that individual's life, like teachers, can be really helpful to bridge where conflict keeps coming up as well.
I think we expect so much of the often neurodivergent individuals that we work with to explain to others that they're a direct communicator and that this is what this can look like. And I guess that's where we really see our role to, shift away from that sole responsibility and actually work with schools or the places where they're engaging to build that understanding of different ways of communicating, and that there may be, people can communicate directly or indirectly, and really building that understanding, because if there's understanding, there's much more acceptance. And then there's that drive, that dual drive and that dual motivation to actually understand the other person, and that's where the perspective comes in.
Yes.
You can't take perspective if you don't understand it.
No.
It requires so much background information to be able to form a perspective that is well-informed, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. I have another client who I have recently, just in term 4, they identified as their goal that they only have one friend. They were in year 7 last year. They only have one friend in their year 7 class, and when that friend is away, not in their class, in the whole of year 7, when that friend is away from school, they don't want to go to school because no one else they participate with. And so they were like, I really want to make friends, more friends. That's really, and so that I have a backup on the days that my best mate's not there. And so her self-identified social participation goal was to build her ability to make more friends. And we actually used the social communication preference wheel with her to understand her own social communication preference wheel, but also what it was in her friends that worked really well and didn't work really well. And then I actually went back to, she also identified that a big factor in her being able to make friends was proximity. So being seated next
Yep.
to people in class who were like-minded and she felt easy enough to communicate with. So I went back to, with her permission, the wellbeing coordinator, who then linked me in with her coordinators for this year, and said, this is the information my client has provided me with about people that she gets along with, people she likes interacting with, and that proximity is really important to her. Can you use this information to create success in some way, to facilitate success in some kind of way? It actually was very little onus on my
the individual,
on my client of actually going into school and being like, can I please sit next to, because she doesn't have those, self-identified, doesn't have those skills or feel that confident to do that yet. And that's okay. And so it is my role as the interpreter to really step in as that middleman and go back to the school and interpret the information given in the session to be like, okay, actually, this is what's going to facilitate success, her version of success in the school environment.
Where do you see social skills done badly?
I think not considering the individual's perspective in terms of what's important to them or what perhaps makes them feel uncomfortable as well.
I think when we see it as a hierarchy,
Yeah.
like I think when we see it as like turn taking and sharing and eye contact and societally we're undoing a lot of bad habits.
Yeah. And it is really important that like I know, like you said earlier, that we don't know what we don't know in terms of, you know, if I look back to me 7 years ago, yes, I may have had social goals with my clients around
I did have
joining the group. Yes, I did.
Absolutely did.
For this person to be able to ask, can I join in, please?
Yeah.
But what I didn't take into consideration there were also things like social problem solving. Just because they learnt to ask doesn't mean that it's going to be reciprocated in the way that they hope. And so then our kids were being left with, I don't understand what went wrong there. So I think, like you said, Danni, I think we are always, as clinicians, we're always trying to understand how do we make this important for
and filling
the
gaps
person
in
front of
knowledge,
us.
I think,
Yeah.
because it's like we think about how dedicated we are to learning and neurodiversity affirming practice, and we're working
Inquiring about
with
lived experience.
Yeah, that's right. And then we're going into schools where it's not what they live and breathe.
No.
So they're relying on external people coming in to actually, you know, give them that information. And so I think we also recommend a lot of different resources for them to actually just create a space where we understand different ways of communicating and that schools can share that with their students as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think it is like lack of education or lack of exposure is probably where I see it, where we see it done most poorly, is that societally the majority of people have an expectation of what social interaction looks like. And therefore, if there is a minority that does not adhere to that, then that is quote unquote incorrect or quote unquote wrong. Whereas when we build education and we increase access to neurodiversity affirming language and advocates and lived experience and all of those kinds of things, that's when we start to see change. And I think the social interpreter model enables change through giving clients a platform and a voice that they may not have had access to previously. Because a lot of the time parents come in, again, with best intentions, but they come in with social goals for their children. And again, it's just because it's a lack of, they haven't had that exposure or that opportunity to consider a different perspective themselves.
And I guess it is easy to understand how parents go to is like they see their child not fitting in or not being able to make friends
to be
happy
with friends.
They want them to be able to socially participate. So we understand those goals. So it is really working with them to unpack what social participation means through a lens that we're building up the child to accept themselves and understand themselves and explore their own preferences, not through a lens of what is expected, but what is actually enjoyable and fulfilling for them. And I think that's a really cool space to work in from our perspective, I think.
Absolutely. And the amount of, I guess, like positive reinforcement I get as a clinician with actually being able to talk to my young people and be like, this is something that's important to you, and to be able to have the privilege of acting as an interpreter to speak with them or to coach them to be able to advocate for themselves or to be able to advocate for them in spaces that they feel that's the support that they need is so awesome, because I see so many more positive outcomes than I ever saw when I had my turn taking and my sharing goals.
I was gonna say, what goals do you just hope you never see ever again?
There's like anything there, NDIS, right?
I think very much goals around, like we were speaking before, like anything that anything that is possibly causing the individual discomfort or impacting their mental health or that kind of thing. I understand parents' intent when they come to me with goals around like respecting others by showing them eye contact or having a still body when they're in a conversation or that kind of thing. And I understand, again, that parents and caregivers may not understand the full depth of what that is actually meaning for that individual. So I always take those opportunities to speak essentially to what we've been speaking to today. And I've never had a parent or a caregiver really push back on that once I've explained the importance of
most parents are have their child's best interest at heart. I think the biggest pushback is often when we're going into school spaces and things like that. It's not that the intent isn't also good, but there's much more bodies to accommodate. And it's
and more people to educate.
Yeah, it's much trickier. And social is hard in an education space. And even forming goals that fit within the school framework and getting those goals represented well. And I think when we're talking about writing goals, I think one of the things that's always stuck to me is the goals should not be about the comfort of others. It should all be about the comfort of the person or the upskilling of the person that we're supporting. So if the goals are centered around more to do with the class feeling comfortable or the teacher or just other people having their needs met, then that's probably a good way that's a bit of a barometer for us to be like, that feels off.
Absolutely.
So that's a tip that I always like to come back to when I'm thinking about social goals, because they're very tricky to write. And like you brought up the NDIS, and when we go down that road, it's like, I know. That's
it's now going to be a 4-hour episode.
Maybe the next episode could be like how much we hate writing goals for the NDIS. Because it's so impairment focused, and we're all about figuring out
they're
ways
also
to
just not just right challenges, and they're also not age appropriate, and they're all just they are so impairment and they're actually so focused outwardly. They're not focused inwardly at all. Exactly what you just said. Like, it's when you're writing like a good goal, it's client focused, it's child led, it's valuable to the individual. And typically those goals are not.
This has been very, very helpful, I think.
I feel so
it's my
energized
perspective that it's helpful. You can hopefully tell the passion from us. But thank you for joining us, Danni.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
We will obviously have you back.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Good.
I did well first time round.
But we will absolutely pop all of those resources that we've referred to in the speaker notes of this episode. And if you're interested, please check them out.
Lucky listeners.
If you are even more interested, we'd love to hear back from you if you do use them in your practice.
Absolutely.
As well.
We love feedback.
But we will see you all or speak to you all next time. Thank you for joining us, Danni.
Thanks for having me.
This has been Pip.